moment that no one has come back from to fully describe. A threshold that sits at the edge of everything we know. And then, beyond it, something we do. And yet, people have come close. Closer than you might expect. People have stood right at the edge of that threshold, looked across, and then returned. And what they describe is extraordinary. There is a moment that every human being who has ever lived has eventually arrived at. Not terrifying. Not what most of us imagine when we think about the end. Something else entirely. Tonight, we are going to go there together. Slowly, carefully. Not as something to be afraid of, but as one of the most fascinating, mysterious, and strangely beautiful things that the human mind can experience. We are going to look at what people see, what they feel, what they hear, what changes in those final hours, and those final minutes, and those final seconds. Not because it's morbid, but because it's real. And it's ours. Every single one of us. So, get comfortable. Take a breath. Let's go slowly into this. Dying, for most people, doesn't arrive suddenly. It approaches, slowly. And long before the final hours, something begins to shift inside the person who is dying. Hospice workers, the people who sit with the dying for a living, describe it in similar ways again and again. They say that weeks before death, something changes. The person turns inward. They become quieter. Not sad, necessarily. Just less interested in the surface of things. They stop watching television. They lose interest in news, in gossip, in the small concerns that used to fill a day. None of it seems to matter anymore in the way it once did. What they become interested in is harder to name. Some describe a kind of review, a slow, quiet revisiting of their life, not in a distressing way. More like someone turning the pages of an old book they love, pausing on certain passages, letting others go. They want to talk about the past, about people they loved a long time ago, about moments that happened decades before. They remember things with unusual clarity. The smell of a childhood home, the sound of a parent's voice, a summer afternoon that lasted about an hour in real time but has somehow lasted a lifetime in memory. Something in the mind begins to sort, to settle, as if consciousness itself knows, before the body makes it official, that it's time to start gathering things up. And for many people, this process is not frightening. It is, by many accounts, something closer to peace. One of the most well documented phenomena in the weeks and days before death is something researchers have called nearing death awareness. It's a pattern, a remarkably consistent pattern that hospice workers began noticing and recording in the 1980s and 90s. The dying begin to speak in different way. They talk about journeys, about needing to pack, about having somewhere to go, a trip they need to take, a train or a boat they are about to board. They ask if their tickets are ready. They worry about whether they'll make it in time. At first, families often think this is confusion, medication maybe, or the mind unraveling at the edges. But the hospice workers noticed something. The people saying these things were not confused in other ways. They could recognize their families. They could hold conversations. They were, in most respects, entirely present, just also somewhere else, slightly, speaking a language that sits between this world and whatever comes next. They describe seeing things that others in the room cannot see, visitors, people who appear in the corner, or by the window, or at the foot of the bed. And here is the part that researchers find so striking. These visitors are almost always people who have already died. A mother who passed 20 years ago, a childhood friend, a sibling, a husband, or a wife. And the dying person is not afraid of them, almost never. They are, by almost every account, glad to see them, comforted, as though someone familiar has come to help with the crossing. Let's talk about what people actually see. Near death experiences have been studied seriously since the 1970s, when a researcher named Raymond Moody published accounts from people who had been clinically dead, no heartbeat, no brain activity, and then came back. What they described was not random. It was not the chaotic scramble of a confused mind. It had a structure, a pattern so consistent across thousands of accounts, across cultures and countries and centuries, that it is very difficult to dismiss. The tunnel. Almost everyone mentions something like it. A movement through darkness toward light. Not frightening, pulling, gentle, like being carried. The light itself, described as unlike any light here. Not the light of the sun, not the light of a lamp. A light that seems to have warmth and intelligence and something that people reach for the word love to describe. Even when they say they have never believed in anything like that before. A sense of expansion. People describe feeling as though they have become larger. As though the cramped, painful, limited body they had been living in has simply fallen away. And what remains is something boundless. A life review. Many describe seeing their life, not as a judgment, but as a showing. Like watching a film of everything that mattered, every moment of real connection, every act of kindness and cruelty, felt not just from their own perspective, but from everyone else's simultaneously. A border, a threshold, a line beyond which they somehow knew they could not go. Not yet. And the return, often described as reluctant, as coming back to something smaller from something enormous. These accounts come from people who did not know each other, people who had no shared religion or shared culture, children who had never heard of near-death experiences and described them anyway, blind people who described seeing for the first time. Whatever is happening in these moments, and science has not settled on what that is. It is real to the people who experience it. More real, many say, than anything they have experienced in ordinary life. While all of this is happening in the mind, the body is doing something too. In the final hour, something called the death rattle begins. A sound in the throat that frightens families, but doesn't seem to disturb the person dying. The breathing changes. It becomes irregular. There are long pauses, then a breath, then silence again. The hands and feet begin to cool. The skin changes color slightly. The circulation is withdrawing, pulling inward, conserving what warmth remains for the vital core. And here is something remarkable. The brain, in its final minutes, does not go quietly. A study published in 2023 recorded the brain activity of dying patients and found something astonishing. In the moments after the heart stopped, there was a surge, a massive, coordinated burst of gamma waves, the same brain waves associated with dreaming, with memory recall, with the highest states of conscious experience. The dying brain, in its last moments, was more active than it had been during waking life. What that activity corresponds to, what it feels like from the inside, we don't know. We can't know. But it suggests that whatever the mind experiences in those final seconds, it is not nothing. It is not a slow dimming. It may be something closer to a flare. Last, brilliant flowering of everything the mind is capable of. There is another side to this story, the people in the room. Families who have sat with dying loved ones describe experiences that are hard to explain. A sense of presence in the room that wasn't there before. A feeling that the air has changed. Some describe seeing something, a mist, a light, a shape, at the moment of death. These accounts are easy to dismiss. Grief does strange things. Exhaustion does strange things. The mind in crisis reaches for meaning. But they are so common, so consistent, across cultures, across centuries. The moment of death witnessed by those present as something more than a stopping, as a departure, a leaving. Nurses who have spent careers in palliative care speak about it almost matter-of-factly. The room changes when someone goes. There is a before and an after, and the after is different in a way they struggle to articulate, but have stopped trying to deny. One hospice nurse in an interview said this: "In 40 years, I have never once seen someone die alone who didn't seem to have company." What that means, what it really means, is not something science can answer yet. Maybe not ever. But it is worth sitting with. Here is something that almost everyone who studies death, really studies it closely, with dying people, comes to understand. The fear of dying and the experience of dying are almost nothing alike. The terror most of us carry, the cold dread that visits at 3 am, the way we can't think about it for long without something tightening in the chest, that fear belongs to the living. To people who are healthy and far from it and imagining. The dying, almost universally, report something different, a loosening, a letting go. Not fighting it, but moving with it. As though the resistance falls away naturally, the way sleep comes when you stop trying to force it. Doctors who work with terminal patients describe a transition that happens, often in final weeks, where the person crosses from fighting to accepting, and on the other side of that crossing, something unexpected appears. Calm, sometimes even joy. People who have never been particularly spiritual describe feeling held, cared for, as though something larger than themselves has come to help carry the weight. People who spend their whole life afraid of death find, when it arrives, that it is not what they expected. That the story they told themselves, the dark, lonely, terrifying end, turns out to have been wrong. This is not denial. It's not the mind protecting itself with false comfort. The accounts are too consistent, too clear-eyed, too specific for that. it seems to be true. The ending, for most people, is gentler than the fear of it. And then there is the deeper question, the one underneath all of this. What is consciousness and what happens to it? We don't know. That's the honest answer. After centuries of philosophy and decades of neuroscience, we genuinely do not understand what consciousness is or where it comes from. We know that it's associated with brain activity. We know that when the brain is damaged, consciousness changes. We know that certain chemicals alter it, that sleep suspends it, that anesthesia removes it entirely. But we don't know if the brain produces consciousness, the way a fire produces heat, or if the brain receives consciousness, the way a radio receives a signal. And the difference between those two possibilities is everything. If the brain produces consciousness, then when the brain stops, consciousness stops. Full stop. Nothing. But if the brain receives it, if consciousness is something larger than the brain merely tunes into, then the death of the brain might be more like the breaking of a radio than the ending of the broadcast. Some of the most serious researchers in consciousness science, not mystics, not wishful thinkers, but sober academics at major universities, have begun to take this second possibility seriously, not as a certainty, but as a genuine open question. Because of the near death accounts, the deathbed visions, the brain's final surge, the things that people see and feel in those last moments, they fit one of these models much better than the other. And that is worth sitting with, quietly, for a while. People who work with the dying change. This is something that hospice workers, palliative care doctors, nurses, and researchers say consistently. The work reshapes them, not by making them sad, though sometimes it does that too, but by clarifying something about what matters. The dying, in their final weeks, are unusually clear eyed. The things that consumed them, the worries about money, about status, about what other people thought of them, fall away. What remains is simpler. Did I love people well? Was I present? Did I let myself be known? Almost no one, at the end, wishes they had worked more. Almost no one mourns the arguments they didn't win, the promotions they didn't get, the things they did not own. What they grieve, if they grieve anything, is distance. The conversations never had, the love expressed too rarely, the ordinary Tuesday evenings they didn't pay attention to because they were waiting for something more important to arrive. The dying see this with a clarity that the living usually can't afford to maintain. And those who sit with them long enough begin to catch a little of that clarity themselves. Begin to see their own life slightly different, to hold them more gently, to waste less of it on things that won't matter at the end. We started tonight with a question. What happens inside the mind of someone who is dying? And the answer, it turns out, is not what most of us expected. Not darkness, not terror, not nothing. Something more like a homecoming, a turning inward toward what matters, a loosening of everything that was held too tight, the arrival of faces you loved and the thought you'd lost, a light that people reach for words like warmth and love and belonging to describe. A final search of everything the mind can do. And underneath all of it, running through every account, every testimony, every deathbed observation, something that surprises almost everyone who encounters it. Peace. Whatever you believe happens after, whatever your faith or your philosophy or your uncertainty tells you, the crossing itself for most people seems to be okay, more than okay. And maybe that's worth carrying with you, not as a false comfort, but as something real, something documented and witnessed and described by people who were actually there. The ending is gentler than the fear of it. That might be the most important thing anyone has ever told you. Sleep well tonight. You are okay.